Hello, I'm George Middleton, your host this evening on this podcast episode of Black Space Live. The topic of our discussion today is the importance of mental health in our education system. But before we get into the topic and discussion, I would like to take this time briefly to encourage you to like, subscribe, and share this podcast. In other words, don't be selfish with this content. Share the love. And while we're on the topic of sharing, you will be glad to know that we have expanded our reach. We are already on YouTube, Instagram, and Twitch, but we're also on Twitter, Spotify. We're on Anchor FM. We are on Podcast Addict. We are also on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, and iHeartRadio. So like an octopus, we are spreading our tentacles. Let's take a minute to introduce our panelists for today. Panelists, please take a moment to introduce yourselves and tell the watchers and viewers anything that you want them to know about you. We'll start with you, Dr. Holmes.
Thank you. I am by profession a licensed clinical social worker for over 20 plus years. I am originally from the DC area, but have landed here in the Carolinas. So I'm in South Carolina now. I moved my practice from the DC area to the Carolinas about 13 years ago. After a while, I devoted more time to training and supervising others. So I do a lot more consulting and supervision for newly licensed clinicians or clinicians that are trying to achieve their mental health licenses. And I just have a passion and an advocate for mental health for our community and kind of closing the gap for especially with our children and adolescents and families when it comes to just understanding mental health disorders, differentiating between mental health and maybe behavioral health issues, and making sure that they have access to services. And happy to be here to talk about this.
Well, welcome. We are overjoyed to have you. Brother Robinson.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Roscoe Robinson. I live in Memphis, Tennessee. My background is education. I was an educator until I got into the social field work. I work at one of the largest, actually the largest nonprofit here in Memphis called Agape Child and Family Services, where we serve over 10,000 families. Specifically what I do, I'm a supervisor over our school programming, where we do wraparound services for our families and students to make sure they are able to learn. So my passion also is mental health. As a teacher, I saw so many mental health issues in my students, and now I'm on the other side. I'm able to provide resources to make sure they get the adequate help that they need to succeed. So I'm excited to be here today to share on this topic that's much needed.
Well, welcome, Brother Robinson. And yes, you two are dialed up perfectly for this discussion today, which is the importance of mental health in our education system. Now, I've given you a format, a diagram of what we want to have our discussion today. But before I get into that, what I'd like to do is give each of you a few minutes to just describe what this topic title means to you and what areas do you see as most important or is your passion to address? Dr. Holmes.
Whew, I've been in the game for a long, long time. And my passion is, especially for our community, for people of color when it comes to mental health, accurate diagnosis, early assessment, education to the educators, whether that be teachers, whether it be police departments, whether it be my passion is how do we educate the community as it relates to mental health, so that we don't have a disproportionate number of people of color killed when the primary issue is a behavioral health issue or mental health issue, not a criminal behavior issue. How do we rebuild families? How do we dispel the stigma that still exists and kind of reduce those generational teachings that have been passed on, where mental health is still seen as a taboo. We don't go outside our family. We don't talk to anybody else. That kind of reinforces people suffering in silence. So any opportunity to talk about mental health, to eliminate that stigma that exists, to educate people about it so that it's not this taboo, and have open discussions, I just feel like we'll be in a better position to really serve our community.
Awesome. Mr. Robinson.
Yes, I agree with everything Dr. Holmes said, as well as for me working specifically in schools. I would say my passion is to make sure that our young Black males have the right resources, and also that stigma of snitching, or if this is a taboo topic to talk about in my classroom, and also to be able to create safe spaces for our Black boys to be able to share how they're feeling, and not make you feel like it's a negative thing to be going through a mental health moment. So that's what I'm really passionate about, to make sure that our Black boys get what they need, because
That's what you call it, brain freeze. He'll be back.
I'm back. Because society is truly making it more difficult for them to succeed in that area of mental health. Also, I'm passionate as well, like Dr. Holmes is, as a teacher, I didn't know the signs or triggers when my students were having a mental health issue. So getting that training, also having those ASICs, which is adverse childhood experiences, teaching teachers on that, also in teaching the students on what to look for if my friend is going through a mental health issue or moment as well.
Absolutely.
Now, if we just had the whole of the national system of education equipped with on-fire people like what I have here on this panel, 90% of our issues would be prevented. But I guess we'll delve into that as we get into this discussion. So I listed at least 7 areas that I feel present stressors in our system of education. And when I sent these to you all, these are not by any means the finality, the all and end all be all. So I'm sure you may have some other aspects to add to that, especially since you're really boots on the ground. But I wrote COVID, critical race theory debacle, the great replacement theory, the banning of books, school shootings, teacher shortages, teacher pay. Do you want to add to that list, or do you want to just like dive in? Do you want to try to prioritize these? How does this minimal list here strike you all? And feel free to jump in.
I know. I'd like to add one. I would say the new curriculum of math and science. Several of our students are already years behind when they get to high school. So I think a stressor for a lot of the students I see is they're acting out on behavior because, hey, I can't even read this material I have. So always the change of the curriculum is a stressor for a lot of our students.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, and when you speak on that, you know, our reading levels for many of the children in our community. You know, I feel for children in all communities. So let's get that straight. But right now, in terms of triage, the population that is in most danger, it's the children in our community specifically. Mm-hmm. So by focusing its attention directly to them is by no means poo-pooing or dismissing the needs of others. I dare say that in taking care and improving the situations of our young people, it will automatically improve the lives of the other students around. Because we're dealing with systemic issues. So I was saying that, how would you, from your level, from your experience, what is most pressing on the teachers right now today in them being able to feel comfortable about the job, go about the job, and provide the service that our children need?
I know Mr. Robinson can speak from an educator's perspective. My ideal would be mental health, licensed mental health clinicians, a department within schools everywhere. That would be my ideal, to really provide that support to teachers. Education is just one piece of it, them knowing what triggers are, but then what resources do they need in order to prevent other students' education from being interrupted while there is a student with a mental health crisis. They can't do it all.
What are the stresses unique to teachers that your idea, your suggestion would cover? Do you see a pattern of consistent stresses coming across, and what are those if you do?
Lack of resources, whether that's in human resources, which goes back to what I just said, support, having adequate mental health supports that are accessible quick enough. Not talking about, after school, but who are available to them when they're in the midst of a crisis. Without those resources, I think that it builds on stressors, because now I can't do my job as a teacher and educator. I can't teach other kids. They're then blamed for any other students in their class who have, missed out on, lessons because of, other kids who might actually need serious help at that time. So I think it's Mr. Robinson can probably speak to a lot more stressors, but just from talking to educators, resources, the supports that they need to be able. I've run into a lot of educators. They want to teach. I would say, this might be hard to hear, but another stressor are parents. Parents that aren't supportive, parents that don't understand, parents that become barriers to those children who need the most help, not getting the help that they need. Even when educators are aware and are recommending and trying to work with parents to say, hey, for him to be successful, for her to be successful in my class, this is something we need to consider. So that adds another stressor, is that now you have parents that are working against what you're trying to do to help these kids to be successful in the classroom and to be able to learn.
That's heavy. I had a recent, I've got a recent client right now who has regular outbursts in the classroom, and at times can get physically aggressive. And the school policy is, when he gets aggressive, to clear out the whole classroom, to let the classroom leave for their safety until he can become more manageable. Therapeutically speaking, I would not be in favor of that policy, even understand the need for safety. But what you're doing from a therapeutic standpoint, you're reaffirming this young man's ability to control the scenario, which then adds additional stress to the teacher, because now she has to come out of teacher mode, direct everybody out of the class, deal with him. I mean, that's highly stressful. And then deal with whatever physical aggression that he's going to do on top of that. therapeutically. Now, here's the catch is the clinical team, when we deal with him, he doesn't do that.
Mm-hmm.
He doesn't do that because there is a cultural gap that exists in many of these schools that our team and you two as well would probably, without even having to consciously say it, you understand. There's certain kids you understand respond to certain styles. And our teachers are not, even in 2022, are not very diverse in their ethnicity or in their experiences with children from a variety, and this is not an opinion. This is the educational, the culture gap between teachers and students is huge. So I feel often that the policies come from a Eurocentric perspective that end up exacerbating the problem, or at the least not solving the problem, which then just creates that additional stressor. But when you mention that example of not having resources, not being able to teach, that's one of my recent situations. And in trying to speak with school staff, they're dug in their way of addressing it. They want to do it by doing level 5 behaviors and a behavior plan, when it's just simple as establishing the pecking order for some kids, so that they know we can't act like this up in here. Not every situation is that simple, but a lot of them are. What are your thoughts on that? This idea about clearing out a classroom for a behavior problem?
So as a teacher, I've had that actually happen to me, because that was in his behavior plan, that was this next step. So I actually had to do that to come back to that question about the stressors. So that is a stressor, having a policy the policies are really against the teachers. They're for students if they have a mental health issue, or they do not, or it's just that they're just acting out. So the teachers feel like they cannot there's no way that I can actually teach or win in any situation. And I would say another one, it was if teachers do not have adequate training, and they know they don't have adequate training, but they feel like if I ask for help, will I be reported, or will I get a negative report if I discuss about I'm not trained. And I would say another big stressor is administration. Administration they're not properly trained, so they're not training the teachers on how to deal with certain situations. And once you get out of the classroom, it becomes like you really think, I guess theoretically, and you don't really understand about what Johnny or Susie is doing in the classroom. They're yelling, they're cussing, they're spitting, throwing chairs. And how do you really deal with this situation? So I believe a lot more coaching needs to be for administrators on mental health, so they can train the teachers.
What does that coaching look like? We're talking about coaching teachers on mental health. What does that look like?
I'll let Dr. Holmes.
Oh, I think he was asking you, because it was.
For me, I know from the ground part. For me, when I was a teacher, I would have liked to have a resource where if this scenario happens, this is what I can do. If this scenario happens, these are the steps that I could do. So I would have some type of game plan that I would be able to have when a certain behavior would act out in your classroom. So a lot of times you have a general, at the district level, you have a general, just a broad training, but it never goes in depth on what actually is going on in our classrooms. And also you need to teach teachers how to be culturally responsive teachers, because some things are culture and it's not behavior.
Right.
So a lot of our Caucasian teachers are having behaviors because it's culture wise and it's not behavior. So that's a whole nother route we could go,
but that's a part of the gap.
Yes, that is, Dr.
That's a part of the gap, and that's a gap that can even exist between mental health clinicians and clients, not just in school settings. I think one of the I'm looking for the right word. One of the, I think, stressors, since we're using that word, the stressors are continuously having systems built around policies and processes that don't take into account the diversity that exists in many of these schools, that don't take into account, like you said, Mr. Robinson, cultural differences. And it also, with one of my passions, and this started years ago with the boom with ADHD diagnoses, right? And the disproportionate number of Black males who were getting this diagnosis for behavioral reasons, not necessarily because they had a certified diagnosis of ADHD. It was a label that was used to say, okay, we'll put them in this category, and then we'll create a policy around what to do with those kids that have that label. And a lot of times the policies are not taken into consideration, like you said, these different, what's the origin of it? Like you said, Mr. Middleton, in that situation, was that acting out even a mental health issue, or was that what he does in response to not wanting to feel stupid because you called on him to read and he doesn't read well? What's the origin of it? Because not everything is a mental health issue either.
Right.
And I think that's something that is lacking, of course, in educational systems as well, is having policies or systems in place or processes in place that really speak to what's the origin, because we can't have a plan if we really don't know what we're dealing with to begin with. So you end up with this cookie cutter approach to, this is what we'll do. We'll work within this box, and anybody that doesn't fit within this box kind of gets discarded.
You speak of the cultural gap, and I put COVID at the top of the list because COVID really has been, it's been a resource in many ways. It has revealed in all of our systemic behaviors the way we have been providing service and how we have been treating each other. And in the school systems, the era of COVID, we as service providers were able to, because of the online instruction, get a peer directly inside the environment of most of our kids, because they're at home, they're in their own natural environment. And I'm sure all of us can share some amazingly interesting stories on some of the behaviors we saw from our children at home in a revamped classroom setting, where we're wanting them to give us their attention virtually in an environment where they can get TV and music. And, I spent a lot of time trying to get kids just to keep their heads in the camera. This generation, they don't even want to keep their head in the camera. It's like, I don't want you to look at me. But they spend so much time on their phones and everything. It was just really eye-opening to see how across the board, Daquan, get your face in the camera. We need your face in the camera. It was interesting, but I saw a lot of the parental environments that these kids are coming from. It was very eye-opening, and it answered a lot of questions as it connects to the behaviors in the school system. What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. It definitely did pull the shades off and gave you another look. And I would say some of my experience with parents, there were parents who are teacher advocates, and I call my parents who are teacher advocates. Those are my parents who work with the educational system. They work with their teachers. They were able to see their kids in a whole new light that increased their appreciation for what the teacher is dealing with on a day-to-day basis. It was a testament to, oh, wow, okay, I can't do this. I don't see how she does this or he does this day in and day out. I am constantly having to redirect and do this. And it's like, okay, so imagine a teacher with 22, 25, 30 students in a room, and all of them, having these same behavioral displays and having to redirect and keep, and everybody's different. You have ones, we talked about, even those students who may not present as challenges, it's still a disservice to them because you don't give them the attention, and they still need support. Even if they excel, they still need encouragement. But it's like the squeaky wheel is what gets the attention, right? So all the focus goes to the kids who have the behavior issues or who might be in crisis. But during this season, we noticed a lot of dynamics where parents, again, the ones that are advocates for educators, who were like, okay, when they go back, what do you need me to do? And then for others, like you discussed, Mr. Middleton, where it was just like totally oblivious. It was more the reverse. Teachers got to see what the home environments really looked like and how that dynamic in the home environment was playing out prior to COVID.
What were your experiences, Mr. Robinson?
Yeah, same here. So I remember we went virtual, and immediately we had so many. Where I work, we have a clinical department with licensed therapists. So we had so many referrals for therapy for our students during COVID. It went up over, I think, 120% during COVID. And also we saw the living conditions of where our students are. So now we see why when they're coming to school, they may need a shirt, or they may need some food in the morning. So we saw so many, just not mental, but they needed food. And also what stuck out to me was the digital divide. I didn't know it was such a digital divide in the Black community during COVID. And thankfully we were able to partner with Verizon and provide all of our families with hotspots and computers for our students during that time. But that is what really stood out to me was the living conditions of our students, and just parents background cussing, drinking. It was just like oblivious type of behavior, and now I was like, okay, this is a pattern that is from parents. So we were able to continue to provide resources, but it's still like from my perspective, I still think we're still coming out of it, because I'm seeing the same behaviors from elementary on up to high school from COVID, from the virtual platform in the classrooms now. So there's need to be a lot of discussion or some type of strategy to help our students to get back to, I don't know, normal, but some type of normalcy now.
Return back to structure. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the other aspect of that too, is now that we've seen it and we're trying to go back to a normal school environment, that home environment, those environments that we were able to peer into are still have an impact, and has the school system in general as a system integrated and accounted for the impact of the home now that we've been able to see it and inside a bird's eye view? Have we adjusted educationally to effectively address those?
I would say no. I don't think so. I mean, when you talk, Mr. Robinson described, his example was a basic need. And that's something that has existed for, I mean, we can go back and talk about, kids who still have issues with food and being hungry, and it doesn't stop. We're not talking about just elementary, we're talking about high school kids, we're talking about middle school kids that are coming to school starving, and you want them to sit in your class and be able to focus on any type of arithmetic when they haven't eaten possibly for days, and how that translates into behavior issues, how that translates to inattention in classrooms. If I'm hungry, the last thing I'm thinking about is wanting to sit and listen to somebody talk to me. That's real. And I mean, adults, if adults can acknowledge that, but yet again, going back to that gap where that's not even considered, that's not even thought about. And those are things that whether you see an environment or not, those are things I think are part of what Mr. Robson talked about. What is the plan? What's the strategy? What are the questions that teachers need to know to ask when they see certain behaviors to have that process of elimination? As parents, we do it all the time when our kids can't talk. We have to figure out when they're hungry. We got to figure out when they need to be changed. That doesn't change for children who don't have a sophisticated communication style or the ability to communicate effectively. We have to figure out, and sometimes it's by a process of elimination and being aware of the community we live in. Where is our school located? What is the population of our school? And what questions should be just a part of normal procedure to say, okay, well, maybe we need to check this. Maybe we need to ask this to see if this is potential. And not doing that, even teaching, I've seen, I applaud the program that Mr. Robinson works at, but in these schools that don't have those resources, that don't have a clinical department, just to see some of the responses of the adults, the responses of the educators are triggering. It escalates situations that don't have to escalate if they understood or even knew, okay, this is a better approach. We don't have to do this in front of the whole class. There's a time and place for everything that we could kind of provide that plan and say, this is how you do it. And that's at a basic level. Just to prevent, from those increased stressors, just to prevent from things escalating or kids having to be taken out of a classroom, completely clearing a classroom for one child. Those basic questions that need to be asked, but they need to be formulated based on where people are, where the school is located, who are you dealing with, what are the families, what is the breakdown of the families that you're serving at that particular school, and knowing that. And I don't think that's something that in the educational system as a whole is done unless it's a specialized school that specifically takes, the time to say, we're going to look at this and make sure we make this a part of our whole educational system. And we don't have enough of that occurring right now.
So here's a question, because the cultural gap has been brought up pretty consistently in this first part of this conversation. Here's a question that I thought of that I didn't put on the sheet that I sent you all.
Mm-hmm.
Since our focus is on the young men and women in our community, should we, as an African American demographic, continue to expect a Eurocentric education system to teach our children all they should know in the way that they should know it?
I'll go.
That question implies a lot. It might have something. You might have some disagreements philosophically, just in the implication of that question. So feel free to dissect it, break it down, however you want to do it.
I would say, from the Eurocentric point of view, it's a system that was created, hundreds of years ago. So some of the gap, us as a community would have to create a school or create something to be able to fill in that gap, because I don't want to say the benefits, but the world that we live in it's to be honest, it's Eurocentric. So our boys and girls, they need to know how to navigate through these systems. Mm-hmm. So the things they're learning in schools, they need to learn how to be able to, like I said, how to navigate systems. In those gaps, we need to be able to have those mentors, mentees to be able to fill in those gaps. You do it this way, but hey, there's another way as well. So I say it twofold. I don't think it's the best approach, but I don't see, if it's not changed at a federal, you really have to go right to the federal level to really change something like that, to the federal level of education, or the policy level as well, at the state level, having, advocacy and lobbyists, people lobbying on the behalf of our children to be able to change I would say at the laws. It would be laws and policies to be able to change that system, because it's like ingrained, like you said earlier, Mr. Middleton. It's systematic. It's systematic, and it's been there for years and years and years. And I'm trying to think. I don't know what you all think on how we could really be able to change it completely, or over time be able to change that.
Okay, so when I hear that, and I think it speaks to something you mentioned too, because we do have kids that succeed inside of this current system, right? We have a lot of kids who succeed, just as many who, we talk about, and while the focus may be on those that do not, there are a lot of kids who do succeed. But I've also worked in schools, charter schools, that have developed curriculums that, are for our communities. But my concern is it goes to the far left from the right. So it's like we want to create something that, teach them, what they need to know to fill those gaps, but it almost creates gaps because it puts them to the other end of the spectrum. And then they come out of these schools not knowing how to navigate and deal with the world as it exists, the reality of what they have to come into. So I'll give you an example. I specifically chose for undergrad not to go to a HBCU because I wanted to go somewhere that would challenge me and potentially have me go through situations that I would need to learn how to cope and deal with in the world. And I went to Howard for grad school, but when I first came out of high school, I specifically, strategically went to a school that was not going to have the majority of people that look like me, that were culturally, like me. I wanted that challenge. And I think there are schools that exist that do that, but I don't know if they 100% is the solution, is the complete opposite end of the spectrum from the Eurocentric system that exists today. I think it's how do we find that middle ground where they learn both. Our children are the most resilient and capable of navigating, I think, more than any other racial demographic. I think they are able to take on adversity. They're able to learn across different spectrums of, whether it's Eurocentric, whether it's Afrocentric. I think they have the ability to do that. It's finding that middle ground where they get the best of both worlds, and that we're not doing a disservice by going from one extreme to the other and still end up with gaps that exist, and they still have trouble navigating the world when they graduate.
Well, just to set the premise of my question, let me give you some stats on this. Coming from the UNCF, this is a study from the on K through 12 disparity facts and statistics. So this is on a national level. Often what we do is we judge our scenarios by our individual personal successes, and we might conflate them with a false sense of collective success. So on a large scale level, here are some statistics. So statistic number one: African American students are less likely than white students to have access to college-ready courses. Statistic number two: even when Black students do have access to honors or advanced placement courses, they are vastly underrepresented in these courses. I'm just kind of giving you the brief rundown here because there's a lot more meat to each of these. Statistic number three: African American students are often located in schools with less qualified teachers with lower salaries, and novice teachers. Statistic four: research has shown evidence of systemic bias in teacher expectations for African American students, and non-Black teachers were found to have lower expectations of Black students than Black teachers. Statistic five: African American students are less likely to be college ready. In fact, 61% of ACT tested Black students in the 2015 high school graduating class met none of the 4 ACT college readiness benchmarks, nearly twice the 31% rate for all students. Statistic 6, Black students spend less time in the classroom due to discipline, which further hinders, we can all relate to this, which further hinders their access to a quality education. Black students are nearly 2 times as likely to be suspended without educational services as white students. And I'm sure I can go down, but this kind of is the overall impact. So yes, I'm not denying the successes. However, on a large statistical category, and especially since COVID has again ripped open the cover, ripped off the cover of our behavior in not just the education systems in every area of service, we're seeing these disparities. So in view of that, it just makes me again ask this question for consideration: Is this Eurocentric model? Are we getting the most bang for our buck? Is it moving us up? Are we maintaining, or are we losing ground?
I would say the focus is, I would still say the focus is misplaced. I think even with the statistics you just provided, it spoke to a lot of factors that exist that need to be addressed outside of just the system, right? A Eurocentric system, right? Because a lot of those statistics talked about individuals, teachers. A lot of those systems spoke to specific people. We can change the actual educational model or system, but if we have the same type of teachers teaching, will that really make that leap or that difference when we look at it at an individual level? As far as the disparities, those disparities have existed. Those are not new to COVID. Those disparities have existed for years, just like disparities in healthcare. This has existed for years. And then but I feel like there's still other factors, not just the Eurocentric education system by itself, but looking at just those statistics you just listed out. And when you talked about the individuals within them, to me, that's where it starts. Because no matter what type of system we create, if we're not educating, training the people that we want to put in those systems to do things a certain way, we can still run into that problem of those disparities. I see people in our own community that fit some of those statistics in reverse, and who are a part of those disparities that exist. And I found myself appalled, like, if we can't help our community, if we're not gonna stand to help our community, how are we going to expect anybody else or train or tell somebody else when they can look across the hall in another classroom and see someone that looks like the people we want them to serve better, completely doing the opposite? How does that work? How does that work? And I think it's just figuring out, is it really about the change in the model, or is it going down to that individual level where we need to really focus on the people that we're depending on to provide for these kids, to teach and educate these kids? I've seen great teachers and educators, and I've seen some that I don't even understand how they still have jobs, to be quite honest.
Brother Robinson?
I love what you both said. I would say it depends on the area. What is the demographic of those students? What is their background? What are they like? And that's where the training needs to be for those students. That here in Memphis, we have statistics say we have 40.4% of our students are in poverty. We have the second highest poverty rate in America. So another part, I hope I'm not going off the subject, is
no, it's fine.
The subject is we're dealing with a lot of PTS trauma. So our students are in fight or flight mode, and also our teachers in flight and fight mode. So everyone is in this state of trauma. The teachers in trauma, administration in trauma. We got kids in trauma, parents in trauma. So how do we get training to reduce that trauma? Because a lot of the dysfunction that I've seen is a lot of our the behaviors is, this is what I do at home. I cuss at my mom. I cuss when I want something. I yell when I want something.
Right.
And I'm fighting. I'm on the street, so I got a lot of boys that are in gangs. So they're in gangs. So this is the way I am. So it needs so much. That's a point. So much trauma training we need in our schools, and also we need people for addictions. We need addiction counselors, because that's another area I'm seeing now. It's a lot of them are vaping, that eat whatever that vaping, they're vaping,
Cigarettes.
cigarettes, they're smoking weed in school, they're sneaking alcohol in school. So we need training as well. What does addiction look like for our student, for our community? Let's talk about addiction. So that's another area we need to discuss as well.
Uh, Personal question with regard to your schools.
Mm-hmm.
How would you rate your schools in the makeup of white female teachers and black teachers in terms of representation at your individual schools, if you feel comfortable talking about that?
Oh yeah, no problem. Yes, my schools, we have one white male teacher in high school. He's a coach. One white male teacher. We have no white female teachers. No, we have one white female teacher, one white male, and the rest of the teachers are black. So, in my experience of teaching, I've never here in Memphis, I've never been at a school where there was more than 3 white teachers at any of my schools. All my schools I've taught as well have been, I would say, 97% or more African American. And that's the majority of here in Memphis, because our population, we have about 70% African American population here. So that's what I've seen. But I've also seen when I was at an elementary school how the white male teachers who taught black boys had this they had this ego trip with them, this like power struggle with the black boys. Like I'm gonna say it, kind of like this slave master mentality, like this mentality, like, hey, who do you think you are talking to me like that? Who do you think you are for not saying yes sir or no sir to me? So that was a power struggle that I've seen as well with white male teachers and the black boys that I work with.
Okay. Dr. Holmes?
What am I speak? I'm sorry. I was so enthralled in what he was talking about, and I lost my train of thought.
Well, yeah, he's kind of like that Pied Piper of speech. Yeah, he can just like lure you in. He's got that. He's got that thing. Yeah, we see you, Roscoe. We see you.
No, I'm over
here. Yeah, we were talking about how would you rate your school in terms of the racial makeup of teachers, and as it compares to the students they're teaching.
Okay, well, I can speak. I'm not an educator, but I can speak for the schools that my kids have been in, and like Mr. Robinson said, it's really where you are, right? So when I lived in DC, where I'm from, very diverse. It was very diverse. And so even the teachers were just as diverse as the student body. I moved down here to the South, to the Carolinas, and that changed. So what I learned being here in this area and outside of the Charlotte area is a lot of people don't leave. The teachers graduate from high school, go to college, and then they end up teaching in the schools they just came through. And the majority, the racial breakdown is majority non-people of color that are in teaching positions than they are. I remember getting excited when, my child got to, my son got to middle school, and he had his first male teacher that was African-American, middle school. So he went through all of elementary, and there were no African-American teachers that he had. There may have been like 1 or 2 in the whole school, but he never had one during his course of elementary. Right. Neither did my daughter. Middle school, same thing. Majority Caucasian teachers. there was one Black male teacher at the middle school, and then in high school, one Black male. And the only reason my son got that one Black male is because he took a computer course that was required. My daughter got through high school and never had an African American teacher throughout elementary, middle, or high.
Yeah, and I'm here in the Midwest,
Mm-hmm.
and now I know statistically speaking, on a big picture level, there's a huge cultural gap, huge racial gap between teacher representation and the student population they're serving. As a mental health profession, us three here, we represent 4% of the African American representation in the area of mental health.
Mm.
So, most of my students, most of my clients, period, young and old, usually before they came to see me, they had a professional that did not look like me.
Mm-hmm.
And, I've had to kind of do some cleanup behind that to just improve the experience of the therapeutic environment. Because as you know, especially in our community, there's a huge stigma and distaste for anything therapy-like.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because of such a low representation of African Americans in the field of mental health. So yeah, in pockets, I'm not going to say it's totally that, but I can speak from my experience that if you're going to see someone for a therapeutic situation and the person cannot connect with you, it doesn't make them a bad person, but they can't connect with you. They may feel like they're doing their best, but they could actually be doing harm because they're imposing an unconnecting, unengaging way of providing that service, especially in areas where you have captive clients. When I say captive clients, those are the clients that didn't want to come to therapy in the first place, but somebody made them. Now you really have to watch how you're approaching that client if you're serious about having any type of therapeutic benefit. But I'm here in the Midwest, and most of my students, they go through the majority of their education experience and can maybe name a few on one hand and still have fingers left of teachers that look like them. Mm-hmm. That's just the reality. So I just thought it was just it's encouraging to hear. I think there's a shift in consciousness about that, mm-hmm. and I think schools are being more intentional. But it's a real thing. Students learn from teachers they see themselves in. Mm-hmm. Let's kind of shift from there and go to the critical race theory debacle. How has that impacted your personal professional areas with your school? Has that been an issue? Have you had to deal with angry school board protests with parents and the banning of classes and, these type of things? Has that impacted you all in any way?
No.
It hasn't. Here, I live in Tennessee, so, our governor's Republican. So, of course, it really hasn't affected our schools at all, the critical race theory. But has it for you, Mr. Middleton?
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
How
and
so?
I'm in a red state as well.
Mm-hmm.
The suburbs, mostly the inner city, not as much. But the suburban areas is where you see a lot of the flack, which it's very telling. You don't see the protests in the inner city, but it's where you have this dynamic of parents who identify as white not wanting their white children harmed by this conspiracy, this theory that this pretty much of a lie that critical race theory is being taught K through 12. And now as a result, you have aggressive book banning that they consider to be critical race theory, but it's not. It's usually some type of historical piece about America, and it just doesn't show America in a flattering light. And white identity is really highly, highly fragile right now when it comes to acknowledging the realities of the impact of how race is impacting us. And again, COVID has ripped this wide open. COVID has ripped open and revealed the systemic racial disparities in education, in housing and loan, in incarceration. Again, you pick the system, we're seeing the disparities. Across the country, racism is being declared a public health crisis. I'm not sure if that's occurred in Nashville, but it has occurred here, and it's occurred in many states across the country, that racism is declared a public health crisis. Now, where you sit racially will determine in large part your feeling, your emotional reaction when you hear racism as a public health crisis. And I can tell you those feelings come down across racial lines. Mm-hmm. And if you identify as white, you're more likely not to want to address those. And it's having an impact even on an indirect level, even for schools in inner city, because they're putting this in policy. Now they're telling you what books you're not allowed to read, not wanting you to learn about the real aspects of where you come from, what the country has done. And, you know, I work as a mentor in one school system, and this generation does not know who the KKK is. Mm-hmm. These young boys literally do not know who the Ku Klux Klan are. Not only that, when they do hear it, they believe it's something in the past, not realizing the reality is that this organization still exists. They're still aggressively and collectively working towards their ideology, towards the implementation of their ideology. And we've got young men in our community that are not prepared because they don't even know that it exists.
Yeah, that would definitely be a different experience here, being close to where a lot of it in the red state in South Carolina, 2 hours away from where, you know, boats were coming in, where there is a museum. I think it was burnt down, but a museum had still existed, you know. And I would say, when I say recent history, meaning in this decade, it was still, the building was still there. So you can't help, because of the culture where we are, but know about it's a part of the teachings just within families, because it's there. A lot of the families here who have been left are from generations of families that were a part of those boats that were coming into the port down in the Beaufort area, and that's how I learned when I moved here. I didn't know anything about it living in the northern states, living in DC. But when I got here, it was like, are you serious?
Right.
A museum? You can do that? I mean, I'm in South Carolina, so, you know, we just recently somebody took the flag down at the State House, right? The Confederate flag.
Right.
So here it was like the norm, that was a part of the culture here, until in more recent years, where I think it was more of an uprising of, okay, we're not going to tolerate this. We're not going to continue to tolerate this as if this is okay. So from that experience here, I can definitely, you know, we've definitely seen that. And then with the last presidency, it didn't make it any better, because I think it became more prevalent, where people got comfortable their mindsets. And it was like, hey, we used to have to be covert about it, but now we can be overt and hey, we can be who we are and be authentic in our, you know, racist thinking and mindsets, because we're supported at the highest level that we could possibly be supported.
Exactly.
For that here, where it was just like, You know, people of color, people were preparing, I'll say that, for whatever might have come from that shift in mindset,
Right.
that overt display of, okay, we about to take you back 400 years. Oh no. Oh, no.
Brother Robinson?
I would say, yeah, here in Memphis, we have a lot of history. Martin Luther King Jr. was shot here at the Lorraine Motel, which is about 5 minutes from where I live at downtown. So our racism it's embedded in the culture here. I would say it's embedded in the minds of the people. So it's so hard. So I'm from Midwest too. I'm from the Midwest. So when I moved here, it was so different the way people thought, even the teachers, the kids. It's just, here we go. It's just like it's a servitude mentality. Mm-hmm. It's a servitude mentality. Like, I can only get to this level and rise because this is like it's like a cap. I don't know. It's like a cap over the minds of the people here because there's so much poverty. I think really poverty is not just resource, but it's a mindset. So it's generation to generation,
right?
And it's ingrained in the schools, it's ingrained in the workforce, it's ingrained in every system that we have here in Memphis, and even I'm across the border from Mississippi as well. So you go down Mississippi, it's KKK. It's like you going back to 1950. You feel like you're going back in the 1950s. You go to Mississippi, wow. They still have called sundown towns.
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Sundown towns where you're not supposed to be there after dark.
Right.
So you have all that going on, and it plays a part of the educational system.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Tying this back with critical race theory, when I get in discussions with people specific on a topic, I challenge them to say, before you can be proficient on addressing critical race theory, you have to be able to tell the difference between critical race theory and race ideology. Mm-hmm. Because most people don't understand that there's a difference, especially from the white identity mindset. They're attacking critical race theory as if it in and of itself is teaching our kids about what race is, which is, from an educated standpoint, critical race theory is the study and the impact of race. So if you really are worried about the impact of what's happening to your white children, your direction, your focus of direction is in error. You need to address race. That is what's teaching you that your son white is white, and by that fact is all of these other things that goes on with white. Mm-hmm. And that this is the part that white identity has a problem with, because number one, they don't see themselves as a race. White is the standard, but white is a racial identity. So they came up with this term called people of color. And I always ask a person of white identity, is white a color? And that question really, it makes people kind of throw back, especially if it identifies white, because I've had them tell me no. And again, I don't judge the answers. I just want them to think. No, white's not a color. I said, that's interesting. So why do they have it in the Crayola crayon box? What color is this? I'll do things like that just to kind of, just jar the thinking process about the whole piece. But the bigger picture is that we're so, especially as educators, and I really am laying this responsibility on the door of professional educators and people who are in the area of diversity and inclusion training. Mm-hmm. You have let a right-wing ideological group come in and tell you about your educational system, and they know nothing about it. They're politicians. They're not educators. And they're coming in, controlling the educator's narrative and saying, you are teaching this. And we don't see teachers equipped educationally to stand up and say, no, en masse, this is not happening. They're allowing the emotion of the conspiracy and the racial animus to take over. And now it has infiltrated many of our schools and is having major psychological and curricular impact on the experience of the education system. Thoughts? Agree, disagree, indifferent? You guys probably think I'm crazy by now?
No.
I'm just thinking. Go ahead, Dr. Holmes. No, go ahead, Dr. Holmes.
I was just going to say I'm not indifferent. I just think where I am geographically, the experience and what we're seeing here is just different.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned DEI groups and that piece of it too, and where there's a big rise on that here in the South within companies, and I think it's starting to spill. It hasn't. I don't think it's gotten to the educational systems yet as much. I think they may do it at the teacher level as a part of their service trainings, but I don't think it's something that's ingrained in policy and throughout the entire educational system like I've seen it in like corporate or work settings have kind of integrated it.
It is here. It is here.
Okay.
From my perspective, I would say, I'm just thinking, are teachers really here in the South where I live at, are they really able to withstand the critical race theory if it came in? Like, how would we train teachers to actually have a dialogue about why I'm not teaching this anymore? Like, how do we train our teachers? That's what I'm saying. I don't know if we have the capacity and the bandwidth right now in the time we're in, because there's so many other issues going on to really tackle critical race theory right now. So that's where my mindset is at. Like, there's other big rocks that we need to deal with, and I think critical race theory is a part will be part of that as we deal with the main issues that is happening in our educational system. I
totally agree. It's not like the teaching profession needs another issue. I totally agree.
Yeah, right. Yes, sir.
But there lies the conundrum, because if you're an educator, and so I'm not putting this on your guys' doorstep, because you're not in the classroom, so to speak, teaching from an educational level, nor am I putting it on my effort. The only reason I am so involved in it is because it's part of my mental health platform. I address the connection between mental health and race ideology. And so this race is a huge stressor. It's just that no one wants to talk about it. They don't want to talk about it because of the emotion behind it. And because the emotion behind it keeps them from talking about it, they don't become educated about it. Now, just because you are ignorant to it, uneducated about it, don't want to talk about it, don't conflate that with it's not having an impact on you.
Right.
Because the statistics say that it is. And so if you're not educated, you're not able to effectively address it in a way that moves you forward. And so we all should be, regardless of our professions, we should be educated about what race actually is, about what racial identity is, because it is behind many of the stressors that we've been discussing here with education and any other system you want to pick in. There's racial disparities that mirror each of these systems of service. Mm-hmm. And for example, Governor DeSantis, he's got the anti-woke bill. He's got the Don't Say Gay bill. He's banning books. People are gonna follow his lead. It's coming our way. It's happening. So if you're an educator, you need to be educated so that you can stand up and say, no, here's the facts. Here's the truth. If you're an educational administrator, principal, or any of those leadership roles, you should be standing at the gate, not allowing ignorance to come in and politically manipulate and usurp your services and your product. Didn't mean to go off on such a rant there, but
now we know what
it's
you are passionate about.
Yes. Yes, passionate.
yes. So I tell you what, I think we've only scratched the surface. I would definitely like to get back and have a couple more series on this, because it's such an important piece. I think schools today are at an identity crisis. They're trying to figure it out. And we as mental health professionals, we know, you've heard that adage, when America catches a cold, Black America catches pneumonia. So with the lack of cohesion in our school in our system of education, that's going to have some significant impacts on our educational outcomes that mirror the statistics that I read for you from the UNCF. So before I go, give each of you maybe just 30 seconds or so to leave us with something empowering, something forward thinking on this issue, or anything else that comes to mind before we go. Dr. Holmes.
I would say we cannot heal what we do not acknowledge. And I would stress and to teachers, educators, parents, taking care of your mental health. And in my practice, I don't even refer to it as mental health. I refer to it as emotional wellness, because I think if you change how you talk about it, it helps to kind of remove a lot of the stigma that people still have when they hear the words mental health. So, hey, whatever helps you to receive that education or that information, find it. But again, I think, it just says a lot to just say we cannot heal what we do not acknowledge. And that speaks volumes.
I love it. Brother Robinson.
I got to follow Dr. Holmes. I would say to advocate for the next generation. Our next generation, they matter. Their lives matter. They're going to be our future. So advocate for their mental health, for their stability. So as we grow older, we will have a society, especially in our community, where we have well-rounded, mentally stable young people able to thrive in the society that we live in. And if you have a mental health issue, let that be the norm to talk about those things. It is okay. It is okay, and it's not a taboo. So let's break down that stigma in the African American community that you're crazy, because you're not. You're getting help so you can become whole and become free.
Awesome, thank you. And what I'll do is I don't have anything spiritually worthy to say, but I do have a piece of work that I think is a good proactive piece. I just released a children's book titled "Kids Are Not Crayons," and it is a book on healthy self-identity and self-esteem. And it's meant to be a proactive tool for parents, anyone working with children, to have a way to help children take control of their own development of who they are. We have all of these influences that are coming at our kids: music, social media, TV, peer groups, telling you who you are. You're too fat, you're too short, you're too skinny, you're too dark, you're too white, you act this way, you act that way, before you can even defend as a kid your own conscience. So this is a tool to help bring identity resilience to your children. It's available on Amazon. Kids Are Not Crayons. So this has been a great discussion. I'm George Middleton. Thank you, Dr. Holmes. Thank you, Mr. Roscoe Robinson. You two have been great panelists. I look forward to continuing this discussion. And to the rest of you, thank you. Have a great week. And until the next time we meet, we'll see you in the Black Space.